Welcome back to the Imaginary Gallery. It's TJ, your host. Tonight is a bit of information for you. You see, we talk a lot about the problems and issues that result from narcissistic abuse and psychopathic abuse and cluster B abuse, and it all seems pretty bad. However, there's one positive I've found from it since I've had such extensive experience with it, which includes my own circumstances. It also includes those of others I've been close to and people they're close to. A fringe benefit which I've picked up from all this experience is a sense of being intuitive, an extra sense. I've developed additional brain skills, which I've been studying MK Ultra and Monarch mind control techniques, and part of that I've understood is that through the trauma, certain abilities can be developed in the subject. Well, I wasn't a victim of MK Ultra, but I do consider the events involved with these creatures to be a traumatic form of abuse. So that could just be my imagination or a mixture of fact and fiction. But what I'm going to do is give an example of how this gift has manifested itself. I'm going to tell you a story. It's a true story about a friend of mine that I used to work with a long time ago. I trained her. She was brand new to my department, and I ended up sitting with her and talking with her daily, and eventually she flashed an image to me on her phone, which was this guy who, it turns out, was like 30 years older than she was, but he was like the man of her dreams, and her plan was to marry him eventually. I had no personal interest in her as far as a dating person, so I was objective. She would tell me stories about him, and I would just listen. And at this point, I didn't really realize I had any kind of gift, but she would tell me specific stories, such as, she loves him because he treats her the way she wants to be treated, which means that when they went in public, he opened the door for her. Well, I open the door for people I'm with, male or female. But anyway, this has nothing to do with me. I would pick up bits and pieces here about this man. It's so wonderful, and how she's in love. And what I'd hear would be little pieces. First off, let me give you a background. She lived in my city. He lived in another state, several states away. And the truth was, she only got to see him a few times a year because he worked elsewhere and traveled a lot, and every so often he would travel here to see her, and they'd have a romantic weekend or whatever the case was. And right off the bat, hearing that, I could use intuition and think, it's not like your neighbor next door you could see anytime you want. It's going to be special. If it's someone who you only see a few times, well, that's going to make any interaction together seem even more special because it's on borrowed time, limited time. But I kept that part to myself. I just continued listening. But then I heard additional stories, such as she had, in the beginning, asked him if he'd ever been married, and he'd said no. Well, at one point she was having trouble getting a hold of him, and finally when she did, she of course asked, well, why haven't you answered what's going on? And his answer was something like, oh, I've been at the hospital. And she was like thinking, he's sick, so what's wrong? What do you mean? He said, I was visiting a friend, a family friend. Well, her own intuition kicked in, and she got the courage up to say, what do you mean? Your wife? And he said, yes. Turns out he had an ex-wife. and the ex-wife was in the hospital, and he was spending a lot of time visiting her, which took away time from my friend. Well, she said to him, like many of us would, "You said you'd never been married before." And his response, classic, was, "I said that?" Well, it turns out, we found out there was also another ex-wife. So, two ex-wives, which is a far cry from, "I've never been married." So to me, that was like notches of red flags, thinking, okay, and you really like this person. Why? They would see each other a few times a year, and evidently during a certain period, the girl had some other girlfriends that had one of those parties, one of those erotic parties, where they had a salesperson advertising sex-type toys and things, and that one of the items was a female pleasure device. Well, this girl had her heart set on this man, and when they were together, they made love, but she also went a long time without him, so she thought it would be a great idea to purchase such a machine that could satisfy that part of herself, not having to pollute the waters with getting some stranger over there to do it. She figured she'd use a toy. Well, evidently she did so, and she used to communicate with the guy on Skype. Well, I guess she was feeling open one day and told him and said, "Hey, I bought this toy because I miss you and you're not here, so I got this toy." And she showed it to him. Well, the story goes that he said he felt threatened by that toy, and he felt jealous of it, and he demanded that she show him on the Skype that toy, and evidently it had a plug that went into the wall, and he demanded that she clip that with scissors and destroy it. Well, when I heard this, it's like, that is control. He should be proud that you found a toy to substitute him with rather than some other boy. But again, I'm not involved in the conversation. But that just kept putting more red flag notches. And I would ask questions here and there, like, well, where does he live? Well, when does he come here? And I pieced together a loose puzzle. And eventually, with all the pieces of information, I developing a profile of what I thought of this person. And then to top it off, because you could always say, you don't know this person, who are you to make any judgment about a stranger? Well, my moment came where one day she sent me a message saying that she happened to be staying with this guy at the very hotel right down the street from the place I worked. And she had suggested that I come and meet him. And I thought I'd be glad to. So after my shift, I mosey on down to the hotel, and I saw him. I, of course, was nice to the guy and shook his hand. And yes, he looked nice, even though, again, he was like 30 years older. And when she talked of marriage with him, her father had said, "I won't walk down the aisle with that. That's a disgrace." Because evidently the guy's older than her father. I went into the hotel, sat down, had some cocktails with her and him, and I noticed how close in proximity he was to her. He was like right up with her, arm around her, and I was just thinking, he's controlling, and he's possessive, and evidently he does what he needs to do. And I was thinking all this. Well, eventually I had to have a talk with her and say, look, I don't know him that well, but here's my assessment. And I came up with various scenarios, such as, I said, well, he does exactly what you want, which means he's a pleaser. And I figured those techniques are probably used on other women. He's jealous and controlling, doesn't want you to have that pleasurable toy. Plus, you say he travels? Well, it would be my guess that he probably has multiple girlfriends in multiple cities or states. And these were all just speculations. And I could, relate personal accounts to what I was hearing, saying, well, many times this is what could be happening, and she would just listen and also partially understood, because I've been involved with plenty of people I knew that were wrong, but I still hung on because you can always focus on the good things. But with all the things that built up, finally I told her, it's like, well, here's what I think. A few months passed with no communication with her. And then, one day, she called me and she said, TJ, you were right. And without going into too many personal details, she had confessed that she had somehow broken into his Facebook profile and had seen several messages from many women, and they were not just hi, how you doing messages, they were sexually explicit type messages. That's one. Two, on a separate occasion, she was at her home, he was out of state in his home, and her phone rang, and the caller ID said it was him. So she picked up the phone and said, hi, baby. Well, it turned out to be a woman on the other end, and she was saying, well, who's this? And she said, well, who's this? So evidently the other woman had been messing with his phone and saw her phone number and called it. Turns out they argued back and forth, and the girl calling was like, this is his girlfriend, and she was like, I'm his fiancé. And there was trouble with that. And then the third, which I would think is strike three, example, somehow she was able, my friend was able to tap into his voicemail, and she witnessed a message from a lady who said something like, you are a jerk. You've got a girlfriend in California and in Missouri and in Texas, and you're pathetic, and blah, blah, blah. So it's a strange sensation, because on one hand I was feeling validated because that's the very scenario I suggested was probably happening, which turned out to be true. But on the other hand, it's like, oh no, I know how that kind of crap feels. So it was kind of a mixed thing. But the point or moral of the story is that I was able to pick pieces of information here and there and details here and there and come up with a very accurate portrayal of the person. I mean, it's just weird how I just guessed, like, you know what, he probably thinks he's the man, he's got chicks all over the place, and what happens? He's got chicks all over the place. He lies about being married. Red flag. And then he's got some girl there with him, calling, and who is this? Well, who is this? And, oh. This is just an example, though, of one. I've had several instances where this type of ability has shined through. But the sickening part is, over the years, I've kind of developed this skill, and then when I'd come into contact with a cluster B monster, it would be so strange, because the same intuition was working, and I could smell BS from the person I was dealing with, and so I would use this talent and say, I know that you had said this, but I think it's probably really like that. And of course I'd be told, oh no, that's wrong. Well, that was a red flag to me, because I'd think, well, that's funny. I use this intuition in various places with myself or others, and it's pretty much very accurate, but strangely with you, it's like 0% accurate. Well, that tells me I'm dealing with a fraud, and of course, in a few cases, that's exactly what it turned out to be. So, if you've been involved with a few of these monsters, you're gaining extra knowledge, you can help yourself and you can help others. So, good luck.
Hi, this is Sandy Hooker, reporting live to you on location in Washington, D.C. Due to a tip from some of the WikiLeaks emails, some suspicion's been drawn towards several key figures here in Washington, D.C. A few that I've dated. Well, evidently, evidence has appeared linking several high-profile people within the U.S. government to child trafficking, satanic rituals involving eating babies, fetuses, and other such things. Not to be confused with the fake news story Pizzagate. That is ridiculous. But several high-profile individuals have been named, including John Podesta, including Hillary Cunt. But honey, they're gonna get off. All they have to do is have sex with the jury. But I'm here, and I'm thinking about changing my name to Sandy Hopester. More following soon. We'll keep you posted and keep you updated. This is Sandy Hooker, signing off for the moment. Keep your kids safe. Other hands might end up being taped to a table at a pizza place.
You know, in order for me to maintain my status as the narcopath,
it does require a few skills on my part. Well, one of those skills is I can read people. So, for example, with you, I was giving you lines of BS left and right, and my measure of whether or not you're worth pursuing is if you stick around. Because, Lord knows, with other people,
they pick up on my first piece of BS and they're gone. And I know, well, that one wasn't right. Thing is, with people like you, you have a tolerance, evidently. I see it as a gift. You tolerate such abuse, as some people call it. And as far as I'm concerned, you're fair game. If you find out that I lied to you, and even though I covered it up and made up an excuse, you still hung around, I took that as, well, you believed me, even if you said you didn't. That's how I get away with things. Because if you had been one of those people with more morals, or with more intelligence, you would have run off after the first instance of fraud. You showed promise, Sandy Hook promise, because if you're still talking to me, the game is on. That's my rule.